Hello, everybody. We're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you so much for being here. This is the panel on AI safety and risk mitigation. It is an honor and a privilege to welcome you to this panel discussion on AI safety and risk mitigation at today's UN AI for Good Law Track Conference. My name is Sam Tyner Monroe, and I serve as the Managing Director for Responsible AI at DLA Piper, where I focus on the evaluation of AI systems for DLA and our clients. A little bit of background about me. I have a PhD in statistics, and I have been working at the intersection of law and data for going on almost 10 years now, and so it's been really exciting to be a part of a law firm at this really exciting time where AI is driving everything. And we're especially in our work at DLA, and my work at DLA, we're focused on the legal risks that can be incurred by our clients who are developing and deploying generative AI systems. One of the services we provide to our clients, which you heard my colleague Bogdana talk about, is the red teaming, legal red teaming of consumer-facing and other Gen AI systems, specifically chatbots. Our attorneys at DLA depose the model, right? They're the experts at poking and prodding and finding the risk. And we also have a data science team, which Bogdana and I are both a part of, using Gen AI to pose questions in an AI system at scale, which allows for broad risk assessment of a Gen AI system and also narrow probing by professional attorney humans. And we also have a trust and safety initiative because we recognize the need for more robust evaluations of AI systems, whether that's traditional or generative AI systems. And as AI systems become increasingly integrated into our daily lives and they grow in their ability and then what they can do, the imperative to address their safety, ethical deployment, and associated risks has never been more critical than it is today. Our collective challenge then is to harness AI capabilities while ensuring these systems operate reliably, ethically, and in alignment with societal values. And to navigate these complex issues, we are joined by a distinguished panel of experts with diverse experience in AI safety. It'll be a really robust discussion. I'm really excited today to have, starting with Shrea Rajpal, CEO and co-founder of Guardrails AI. We also have Kathy Baxter, the principal architect of responsible AI and tech at Salesforce. We have Dan Hendricks, the executive director of the Center for AI Safety, and we have Christina Knight, the ML safety and evaluations lead at Scale AI. The discussion today will delve into several critical themes critical to AI safety. But one thing I do want to talk about is interdisciplinary collaboration. We heard a little bit about this on the previous panel. Between legal and compliance, I'm not a lawyer, but I work at a law firm, so that this, legal and compliance and technical team interdisciplinary collaboration is really critical in ensuring that AI technologies are deployed safely and responsibly. And so I look forward to an insightful discussion with these panelists, and I'll turn it over to the panelists to introduce themselves. Shrea.
Hi, everybody. Really excited to be here. I'm Shrea. As I'm one of the founders and the CEO of Guardrails AI. As the name suggests, we're really focused on generative AI risk and reliability and how we can, tackle a lot of those risk and reliability issues with technical mitigations and technical interventions in addition to policy. Before starting Guardrails, my background has been as a technologist in machine learning and as a researcher in the space. I worked in self-driving cars for many years and, worked at system-level robustness for self-driving cars, and a lot of what dictates our viewpoint on how AI safety should be tackled is, very inspired from methods that we've seen be very, very successful in the self-driving car domain for many years. Excited to be here.
Hi, I'm Kathy Baxter, Principal Architect of Responsible AI and Tech at Salesforce, part of the Office of Ethical and Humane Use. I was a visiting AI fellow at NIST for a couple of years, so helping to contribute to the AI risk management framework. I'm on Singapore's AI Verify Foundation Advisory Council and on the board of the nonprofit Equal AI. So spend a lot of time working with our product teams, customers, and policymakers and lawyers to think about how do we build AI responsibly and how do we create AI that society can trust.
Hi, I'm Dan Hendricks. I'm the director of the Center for AI Safety. I also advise Scale AI and XAI, XAI being Elon Musk's AI company. And before this, I got my PhD in AI from Berkeley. And I'll keep bumping into legal issues in trying to think of what is a legitimate basis for constraining AI systems. And these issues also come up in policy for what should we be doing with our LLMs at XAI to make them cosmopolitan and compatible with a pluralistic society, but still having some guardrails. So I primarily spend time thinking about the geopolitics of AI currently, though, but hopefully, but yeah, I think this will be very fun. I love attorneys as well. I liked philosophy when I was younger, and then it seems that law is when you allow a philosophical, analytic mindset, but then you allow yourself words like reasonable and things like that, which opens up a lot of new doors.
Hi, I'm Christina Knight. Thank you so much for having me here. I help lead safety and red teaming at Scale AI. A bit about me is I studied AI here at Stanford, and this direct coding models got me really excited about the potential of AI, but also very aware of the risks. So pretty early on in my career, I switched from a technical focus to looking at AI deployed in society, first by doing a graduate degree in philosophy, looking at more normative frameworks for AI governance, and then moving to China and looking at AI applied to society, and living in Beijing for a little while and studying semiconductor export controls and their domestic AI ecosystem. When I moved back to the US, I worked for former Secretary of Commerce Gina Raimondo to help implement the Biden administration AI executive order. And then when the US decided to stand up something called the US AI Safety Institute, which for those of you who don't know is a body directly for governing the safety and security of frontier AI models in the US federal government. I switched over there to help stand it up, and recently, just a few weeks ago, actually moved back out to San Francisco. So happy to be here.
Great, thank you so much, everybody. I want to start with a really foundational question about the terms AI safety, AI risk, responsible AI. We heard a question on the last panel about that. So these are widely used terms. They're used across policy, academic, corporate settings without necessarily super clear or consistent definitions, right? And so how do each of you define and distinguish between those three concepts of AI safety, AI risk, and responsible AI?
So I think broadly AI safety is a socio-technical problem, and this means things like great power competition matters. We can see that this affects a lot of the decision making as to whether policies making AIs will be stringent, or whether they'll be very loose, and whether there'll be exhaustive testing before release, or whether they'll be tested a few days before they're mass deployed. So I think it's important to remember that AI safety isn't a sort of technical nerd problem for some scientists to figure out, in the same way that nuclear strategy is not something that Oppenheimer is going to figure out by doing some better physics. It is much broader than that. The incentives matter. The restrictions and incentives at all the levels of organization, at the corporate level, at the domestic regulatory level / legislative level, and at the geopolitical level. Now, most people, though, are interested in what does safety mean when we're talking about individual AI systems. So for that, I would like to submit a notion that is more legally grounded for that. I think you may have heard of helpful, harmless, honest as a sort of policy from Anthropic for making AI systems good and useful and safe. I think an upgraded notion of that for helpful would be AIs acting as though they have fiduciary duties to their principal, that is the user, so it needs to keep them reasonably informed and be loyal to them, execute their will, provide informed consent, etc. So I think that can be a nice legal basis for trying to be more specific about what we're meaning when we're trying to say that they're helpful to the user. They're to act as a fiduciary. For harmless, harm is a very messy notion generally. Is it offensive to somebody? Should it be refusing their, actually we don't deal with that. We're not, filtering, offensive responses. Instead, the basis is it in violation of reasonable care? Does it pose an unreasonable risk? That is, I think, a more suitable basis for harmlessness of taking the notion of reasonable care and saying that agents need to act in keeping with reasonable care, and then we can annotate whether this would be an action that would make it wind up in court if a human were to do it. And then third, for honest, I think that is basically making the AIs not overtly lie. Other things like puffery and whatnot are okay, and omission. But overtly lying seems like a sensible restriction there. So I think if we do those three things, fiduciary duties, reasonable care, and not overtly lying, that is a sort of machine ethics or a basis of restriction so that they're useful but then also safe in a way that is compatible with a cosmopolitan society.
At Salesforce, we have a set of guidelines that we use to guide our creation of generative AI and agents. And so we focus on ensuring that it is accurate. This is incredibly important in enterprise CRM software. If it's going to be used in a field service use case, for example, and you ask it to summarize the instructions for how to repair a large piece of industrial hardware, it really needs to be accurate. It can't skip the step that says unplug or turn off the power. So this really needs to be accurate, avoiding hallucinations, giving a way for users to check, to validate that this answer is legitimate, that it is correct, that it is complete. It also needs to be safe. So these words are often used interchangeably. Responsible AI, ethical AI, trustworthy AI, safe AI. In our definition, we define safe as protecting people's data, so protecting people's privacy, being secure, avoiding toxicity, being aware of bias that may harm individual groups, and then it also must be transparent. So when is AI being used? We don't want for it to be perceived that this was human generated. If you're interacting with a chatbot, it should be clear this is an AI agent or this content was AI generated. It also needs to be empowering. There are great use cases for automating tasks and opening up opportunities for humans or superpowering human capabilities. And they need to be able to be in charge of the AI. The human needs to be in control. And finally, it needs to be sustainable. Sustainability is one of the 5 core values at Salesforce. And so we focus on creating right-sized models. We're not trying to create the biggest models out there. We're trying to create narrow AI that works really well for CRM. And so being very mindful when we're making decisions about the carbon and water usage and helping to contribute to things like an energy standard and Coalition for Sustainable Development of AI.
So I can talk about, especially as we think about these 3 terms, right? Like AI safety, responsible AI, and AI risk. As Kathy pointed out, they are used interchangeably, but based on, a few years in post ChatGPT release, I think there's some delineation that's emerging between how, functionally they're used. So what I'm going to be talking about is like, what is that functional differentiation that I see? And then as I talk about that, I think a helpful framing to have in mind is differentiating between AI models and AI systems, right? So again, Kathy talked about like AI agents. AI agents are an example of an AI system that includes like some logic, some maybe, like prompt engineering, some access to external APIs, et cetera, that makes the system greater than just the model, whereas the model is obviously something that's released from like a frontier research lab, et cetera. When we talk about AI safety, what I typically come across is AI safety risks are very specific to the risks that are inherent in the model, such as bias, stereotyping, confabulation or hallucinations, et cetera, as well as any societal impact of the models kind of like not being aligned with our intrinsic value system, right? So any risks around, is this model going to make it like really easy for insurgents to create like really state-of-the-art chemical warfare or something, right? Like so all of those would be encompassed within AI safety. Responsible AI is a more of a system level problem, especially in organizations and enterprises as they're thinking of AI today. So it typically encompasses, cross-functional stakeholders, folks from, legal and compliance, folks from the technology department, that all think about how does, the design of the system take into account its impact across all stakeholders, right? So things such as like, does this AI system, let's say, you're building a customer support chatbot, right, for your toy sales shop or something. Does this customer support chatbot actually align with like our policies around how we want to treat our customers, et cetera, right? Like, is the verbiage aligned with our internal company communication policies? All of those, they're not unsafe, but they will be, violations of that order will be considered like responsible AI violations. So there's a system level versus like model level differentiation. I think AI risk and how I think about it is just kind of like a flipped version of responsible AI. Might be something that might also end up being like a purview of the technology teams typically, as they think about like evaluation, benchmarking, et cetera. But they go like very, very hand in hand with like responsible AI. In enterprises though, and in organizations, I see responsible AI being more of a focus than AI safety. So yeah, that's what I typically observe.
I think Shrea is right in that functionally it's helpful to have distinctions between these three terms, but I also think that perceived irreconcilable differences between AI safety and AI ethics and security lead people working towards a very common goal to not work together as much as they could. So in my perception, when I think about AI safety, I think of it in very broad terms, including everything from near-term harm, like the generation of explicit harmful material, to more long-term emerging risks, like enablement of offensive cyber attacks or the development of a chemical or biological weapon. And then here, when I'm talking about AI risk, and this relates to the RMF, it's the likelihood of harm occurring due to AI composite with the impact of that harm. So this helps us prioritize research, develop comprehensive threat models, and figure out what safeguards to implement. And then here, responsible AI is any effort that takes into account these risks while also continuing to innovate as fast as possible.
Thank you, everybody. So we have a kind of a grounding of AI risk and thinking about risks posed both near-term and long-term, like you were talking about, Christina. And so what do you all see as the most pressing risks posed by AI, and what safety measures are needed to mitigate them? If we want to start with Christina down at the end.
I think AI is emerging very rapidly, as we all know, and so it's hard to pinpoint one risk that is the most important. Because I have a China and national security background, I tend to focus more on the risk that well-resourced state-backed adversaries would have access to and develop the most advanced technology. This has kind of two connected but distinct risks. One of them is a technological moat risk, where the country that develops the most advanced AI will have the most advanced AI military capabilities, whether it's coordinated drone strikes or advanced wargaming techniques, and also the most burgeoning AI economy. Distinctly, there's also the risk of that country then disseminating AI across the world, which has both a hard power concern of critical infrastructure relying on that technology, which, for instance, there was a paper released by Anthropic last year about sleeper agents, where developers can embed malicious code within models that then, when prompted in a very specific way, will act in a way adversely to a user's intentions. When these models are embedded in healthcare, education, financial systems, this could raise huge concerns. This is also a soft power problem, because these models are increasingly shaping how people perceive truth, what we think about values and history, and informing our opinions. And models developed in China, for instance, have to abide by very specific requirements to uphold certain values and promote certain political narratives. That, as you can imagine, is very harmful when it's shaping the global information ecosystem. And then lastly, data. When we're thinking about how we interact with models, a lot of times the user data is then integrated back into training data for the developer. In China, under the National Security Law of 2017, 2021, this data can then be given to the central government. And so all of these concerns mean that we need to think about safety and safeguards in a very kind of comprehensive way. On the first technological moat issue, I am a firm believer in export controls. I think that they're quite effective. They're not perfect, but we do need to build on the October 7th and 17th semiconductor export control policies to include, for instance, the new H20 chips. I also think that we shouldn't just think about export controls. It needs to be a more nuanced, comprehensive policy where we work together to create kind of mutual assurance with adversarial nations. On the dissemination piece, I would say there are three main things that we should do. The first one is advanced security research focused on things like sleeper agents and deceptive tools. Second, we should work with other countries to develop comprehensive testing frameworks. When I was at the AI Safety Institute, we worked with other safety institutes across the world to create the world's first international joint testing exercise, which helps countries not only understand what risks to assess for when they're integrating models into critical infrastructure, but also kind of gives a plug-and-play framework for a methodological way of assessing these tools. And then lastly, we need to just continue to advance in a way that is responsible and taking into account these safeguards.
Sure, I'll happily build on that. So I agree the geopolitics is very important with Scale's CEO and Eric Schmidt, the former Google CEO. There's a paper I'm on with them where we put out or write about the national security strategy in a paper called Superintelligence Strategy. So just sort of plugging that if people are interested in going further in there. So that's would be my normal answer. Is just go look at that. That's where the latest thinking on some of this safety stuff is, and to build on her answer. But I think for you all, what would be something on the horizon legally? Well, I think these agents, they're going to create quite the complication in so many ways, and I don't see many solutions sort of built beforehand. So I spoke about how the law can be useful for deciding how individual agents should be acting, like with fiduciary duties and them exercising reasonable care. What are we to do, legally speaking, about agents acting on people's behalf later? What's the liability there? How is that to flow? So these agents could very well emerge in 6 months' time. And if you're having AIs running around on people's behalf and it's not clear who's accountable, this will be, I mean, obviously there'll be lots of torts and crimes, but it's also bad for economic stability as well if many AIs are committing torts and crimes and it's not clear who is accountable. So we have some issues such as if we wanted to just say, well, we're going to apply the existing law to AIs, like a lot of it doesn't work. Like what mental states, there's maybe mens rea. I mean, we're going to say the AI felt guilty, and therefore we're going to hold it. We're going to say it's criminal or something. So that's a problem. I think one possible piece of leverage is the knowingly type of condition. So a lot of law, as you know, makes use of knowingly, and that's a bit tricky with AI. Let's just walk through a specific example. In the Implementation Act of the Biological Weapons Convention, you are not to be knowingly helping a terrorist make a bioweapon. But if an AI is doing it, then is it knowingly doing that? I mean, it might be guiding them through step by step, but that doesn't apply. And the creator of the system, maybe they're not monitoring it, so then they're not aware, so they're not knowingly. So then who gets in trouble there? So we have to think about what are ways of constraining AIs in the spirit of the law without sort of mental states. There's actus reus or something. use that. But that is a problem, and I don't see much discussion about how to be covering AI agents or clarifying liability flow. Once we do that, this will create new markets. This will create companies that can provide collateral for AI systems. That maybe you don't trust this AI system, but the operator of the system has put up collateral. So now you just need to trust that the collateral will be given to you if something bad happens, or insurance systems for agents where you just need to trust the insurer to sort of de-risk the agent for you. Agents could submit themselves to filters. There might be a third-party filter. So you're not directly interacting with the agent. Anytime you're interacting with the agent, it went through a filter. So then you just need to trust that third party. So I think there's some multi-agent infrastructure that can be useful and will be economically incentivized once we clarify who is presumptively liable in these situations. So I guess that's sort of two things. How are we going to, we need to think of some ways of updating our laws to capture agents. Then this will give rise to incentives for creating multi-agent infrastructure to facilitate interactions between humans and agents and agents and agents.
I just quickly build on what he shared. So this technology is evolving very quickly. In the earlier days, predictive AI, old school AI, there were a lot of discussions around how to do trust and safety testing for it. We've expanded that, tried to apply that to generative AI. Now we're attempting to apply that to agentic AI. The next step from there is agent to agent protocols. How do you test for that? How do you know when your agent interacts with another agent if that other agent is trustworthy? How do you know that they have all of the certifications, whether it's, if it's in healthcare, then it's going to be HIPAA. If it's financial service, SOC compliance, you want to purchase something. So there are a lot of considerations coming from a trust and safety testing and evaluation standpoint of how do we understand what it means to say that our agent is safe, another agent is safe. When they come together, is it peanut butter and chocolate, or is it an explosion? And so right now, there's a real lack of standards because we are racing, we're trying to keep up with this technology to ensure that we're able to have observability, monitoring, and know when has something gone wrong and how might we repair when something has gone wrong.
Yeah, I definitely agree with like all the panelists here. I think like when I think about what's coming on the horizon, I think the critical issue here is that like all of our AI systems today are not at the level of reliability where you can consume what they've built without human intervention or human verification. And so any AI system that has seen mass adoption today makes this implicit assumption that there's a lot of like human verification happening, right? And the place we're seeing this the most right now is AI generated code. So for anybody that's a programmer or an engineer in the audience, you probably have seen like in the last year or even in the last 6 months, it's just been like a complete like hockey stick curve, right? And so much of code today is AI generated. At my own company, everybody uses Cursor, everybody uses like AI generated code, but that only works when people are very, very diligent about like verifying the quality, safety, security of that AI generated code, right? I think this kind of like abstracts to like a broader problem with AI generated outputs, which is that verification, the burden for the human changes from creation to verification, and there's been like numerous studies in the past, et cetera, that show that when that burden shifts, like verification is just like it's an easier problem to mess up. We saw this in self-driving all the time, right? Even when you're driving, like even for example, like at self-driving car companies, the driver, so to speak, in the driver's seat, even if they're not actively driving, they still need to be extremely alert. And it's a much higher burden than just driving the car yourself, right? Because you have to be like very attuned to your surroundings. And we've seen like, countless times before that, when there's a situation like these, like mess ups happen and people, take their eye off the ball. So how do we prepare for, this just proliferation of like AI doing more and more work for us, and humans being humans, are not going to do a good job verification. So how do we kind of make sure that, anything that anything that AI touches is still going to be, airtight and not going to be corrupted by, this AI-generated output. And I think that also kind of ties into, what are the standards and guidelines that we must follow on an AI system level rather than, just a model level.
Thank you all. Yeah, let's focus in on those standards and those guidelines with this next question. Dan, you've spoken a lot about legal frameworks and how we might need to develop new legal frameworks, right? But generally speaking, and this is a question for all of you, what role do you see specifically legal frameworks playing in AI safety, and then how can policymakers, people writing the laws, people enforcing the laws, how can they collaborate with technologists to create effective AI safety regulations and standards like you all were just talking about?
Yeah, I'll just reiterate, I think that the law as a basis for when should these models refuse or what constraints are we placing on their behavior seems to be the right approach to me. Inside of that, inside of those constraints, there can be various different AIs. Some can have different propensities. Some are more shocking. Some speak with a British accent. Some are spicy or sexy or whatever. That's for the free market. But inside of those constraints, inside of the constraints of each of those individual AI agents acting as fiduciaries, exercising reasonable care, I think that inside of that zone, or inside of those constraints is a zone of different sorts of patterns or ways of designing AI systems. So I think that it's a better basis because otherwise it becomes extremely arbitrary. The ethical beliefs of their creators, all right, then end up being imposed on the rest of society. And I think we want generally a more cosmopolitan, pluralistic, or our AIs to be more compatible with that. So that's why I think it's you all, the ideas that you have developed, I think, are very central to policy for these individual AI agents. Right now, people are, when should the models refuse? It's completely made up. It's set by, that sort of threshold is implicitly set by data annotators in Nigeria. They're the ones sort of setting the policy as well as the ways in which they're being instructed by generally people in San Francisco for how to label this data. So it's that I think is a less suitable basis for when the AI should help or not, and the law is much better. So I just want to activate this room in some way that you're pretty central to this, and currently people are just making things up and kind of reinventing the law and restrictions in reinventing the wheel and not taking advantage of this accumulated intellectual inheritance and constraining AI with that.
I'm actually going to disagree with Dan here. I think in principle that policy sounds good, right? Like we should all agree what the standards are and then implement them. I think with how this technology is built, it just becomes so hard in practice to execute that and enforce that it ends up being like a meaningless burden, right? We're enforcing this burden on American companies that they have to comply with this, and DeepSeek and like frontier AI labs globally don't have to adhere to the standard, and still get they still end up getting usage in the US and in our borders, right? So for example, even if we come up with in this room, for example, if we come up with a shared understanding of what it is and isn't okay for models to say, it is so ridiculously easy for even one person with like 100 examples of how they want to change the model behavior to just like take that model and update it and then start sharing and distributing their version of the model, right? And this is pretty decentralized because of how open and academic AI research was for the longest time. Like it's very, very easy to distribute these versions of models, right? So I think like in this framing, I think a more effective way to think about like AI policy and regulation is to think about like what the is to basically like apply policy based on how AI is expected to be used, right? So if you are, for example, like a financial institution that's using AI in a way that can cause real harm to your customers, can give them misinformation, et cetera, that is where like regulation should apply, and it should be very grounded in the context with which people are going to use AI, and the like likelihood and magnitude of harm that AI can cause, right? So even if they're using an AI model under the hood that maybe can talk about spicy subjects, and that's not something that is legally allowed. It's on the bank, for example, to then enforce that when that model is being used, within the system that can actually cause harm, that they're enforcing the necessary safeguards and the necessary guardrails, so that that harm is like concretely, tactically, limited.
So I guess just I think for geopolitical competition, I think the U.S.'s economic stability will not be there if AI agents are not expected to exercise reasonable care or be loyal to their principles. So I think that those are important for economic competitiveness, and economic security is in some sense national security. So I think that those are reasonable standards, and things that violate that, if we make it clear who's presumptively liable, then I think the legal system should go after people who are releasing AIs that cause lots of damage and are imposing unreasonable risks on people, and that's just how it's going to have to be. You could say, oh, maybe China won't or something. I think there are other ways of competing with China, such as on export controls, AI chip manufacturing, robotics manufacturing. These sorts of things are, I think, the main way in which we get a competitive edge, not in allowing AIs to impose unreasonable risks and engage in criminal and tortious behavior, if it would be criminal or tortious for a human to do, and letting AIs do that. I think we want those sorts of restrictions on them. And I think that it's overall good for economic functioning and commerce to have those sorts of standards.
I'm going to come in here with kind of a compromise between you two. I think, well, first of all, right now, we're still very much in as former Secretary Gina Raimondo would always say, an information gathering phase. There's a lot we don't know, and so imposing really strict legal requirements right now would likely be infeasible and impossible to implement. But we can think about it in kind of a very permissive base model. You only prevent against the most extreme illegal harms at a general level. And then, as Shrea was saying, you go to the user, product, and context-specific deployment of whether it's an agent or a tool with specific integrations, and look at how people are using that AI and then regulate to that regard. I think there are two main things that we can do to get there. The first one is conduct both preemptive and reactive red teaming. We can't just focus on monitoring downstream use and then implementing that back in and patching, like putting on Band-Aids. We also need to do kind of what people call vibes testing of just probing a model in a lot of adversarial ways to see what it might elicit, and then what harms you need to implement into downstream safeguards. And then the second thing that we really need to focus on in terms of collaborating between government and industry in order to ensure that the regulations not only make sense at a basis level, but also make sense at an implementation level, is to work together to develop them through things like, I'm going to plug the AI Safety Institute again. We had a consortium of 290 members from across industry. It was broad developers, but also very industry specific in finance and healthcare. And through mechanisms like that, the government can work directly with industry to develop these legal frameworks.
So I want to add a couple of quotes that I think are helpful. I often hear the phrase, regulation kills innovation. I disagree. So to give an extra plug to the AI Safety Institute and former Commerce Secretary Raimondo, at the International AI Safety Institute Summit last year, she said, safety is good for innovation. Safety breeds trust. Trust speeds adoption. Adoption leads to more innovation, and we need that virtuous cycle. There was also a draft report that was published a couple of weeks ago by the Joint California Policy Working Group on AI Frontier Models. There are several folks from Stanford that are on that working group. It's a really good report. Highly recommend checking it out. But one of the key themes that they noted was that technology can thrive under a regulated environment provided the regulation balances economic imperatives with public safety, is specific and prescriptive for a particular reason, and does not impair the use of the technology for its stated beneficial purpose. So I think like the TLDR is that there's lots here and there's a lot of balancing to take into consideration. We can't have a completely hands-off attitude. We do have to have consequences when things go wrong. We can't wait until after the things have gone wrong and then realize that it's gone wrong. We have to be really preemptive in our actions. We have to be mindful throughout the entire development life cycle, and then once it's in the hands of users, and understand what's happening and be responsible at every step of the way.
If I can add to that, very quickly, I completely agree. I do think counterintuitive to what a lot of my counterparts in San Francisco think, I do think having a robust safety framework is actually going to spark innovation, right? It's no surprise that where we're seeing the biggest adoption of AI systems is also, some of the lowest risk, lowest regulation systems, right? Software engineering, right? Or very few, or very limited adoption in healthcare, et cetera. And then having a very robust safety framework in those high-risk regulated environments would spark innovation, right? I actually wanted to here give the example of, I guess, a safety institute and a framework that's doing, a really nice job, which, Kathy, you'd mentioned Singapore's AI Verify Foundation, and, contrasting their approach with how we're building safeguards and standards in the US, right? In the US, a lot of focus is on, the regulations on frontier models. Compared to that with Singapore, what they, a lot of their focus is on enterprises and organizations that are adopting AI to, speed up or optimize some some workflow or some, some kind of optimization of back office operations, et cetera. And then what they discovered there is the lack of legal and compliance teams having an understanding of what it would take to actually successfully adopt and deploy this AI system actually led to a loss of innovation, right? So the protocol or the framework for coming up with standards is to then, have this cross-functional partnership with industry, with academia, and with large organizations, and then, foster an environment of collaboration where, they're facilitating partnerships between these different organizations so that they can see how, in practice, organizations, carry out their testing, their red teaming, et cetera, in order to deploy the system, right? And then that ends up being this crowdsourcing pool from which they can, make sure that they're up to date and understanding what the set of standards and frameworks should be, right? So that ends up being a way of developing safety frameworks that's very grounded in practical and actually sparks innovation rather than restricts it. And I think here in the US, we can in my opinion, take a lot of lessons from that protocol.
Thank you all. Yeah, I love this idea, Kathy, of the virtuous cycle. And so, especially given your role in a large organization, how can organizations really strike that balance, really implement that virtuous cycle between, innovation and safety and sort of creating safety to create innovation?
Yeah, so we are a SaaS provider, so we create agents and models and AI systems for our customers. And we take all kinds of means to assess the individual models and then assess them in the system and context of use. We do a lot of ethical red teaming, benchmarking, and then provide it to our customers. And then we give our customers tools to then have responsibility for how they use it. So they'll use RAG to ground the models in their own data. We have a trust layer that they can set the toxicity threshold wherever they like it. So on a scale of 1 to 0, they can say, in this end, do nothing, let the text go through. between this range, raise a flag, give a warning to that sales rep or the customer service rep. It looks like this model has generated content that might be toxic. And then anything above that score, it's likely to be very toxic. I don't want my employees to see it, block that. So giving those controls to the customers. They can also control the system prompts. So the set of rules, the set of instructions that they give the model or give the agents for the prompts, the controls. What is the agent allowed to do? What is it not allowed to do? So providing all of the tools to the customers so that they have control for what makes sense for their company, their industry, their users, their brand. So thinking about the entire ecosystem is incredibly important.
Thanks, Kathy. Yeah, anybody else, how do we, foster innovation and, do it safely?
I think obviously public safety is very important. So in addition to conventional crimes and torts, there is handling terrorist type behavior like bioweapons or offensive cyber attacks on critical infrastructure. And so for that, there are safeguards that can be implemented. So for instance, in bio, what you do is there's some standards like don't answer very detailed questions for how to manipulate viruses such as those on the U.S. Select Agents list or that the Australia group says are salient, and don't give them ideas about how to make them more stealthy or potent. And you can balance that with innovation by if you have a .edu email address, you're a PhD student at one of these universities, or you work at Genentech, a biotech company, then we'll just take those filters off for you. So random users who made an account a second ago don't have access to some of those capabilities, and people who have a reason to have access to those capabilities get access to them. And that's an easy way of balancing it, and that's what we do at XAI, where we are restricting answering detailed questions about how to manipulate viruses that would require expert level knowledge, but giving it access to others. And then for the less severe stuff, I think it's I think, and I'm just sort of repeating just that way people remember it, a day from now plus, is the I think the AI system should exercise reasonable care. Right now they're doing actually a bit more than that in some cases. They're refusing for more than just things that would pose unreasonable risk. They're, things that are offensive or something like that. So they're, adopting politeness norms and things like that in addition. But I think when we have agents, it's important to be emphatic that they should not be imposing unreasonable risks on other people when they're out there operating. And I don't think that is incompatible with economic innovation or moving fast. I think that is the sort of sweet spot, as we have seen elsewhere in the economy for humans, for not imposing too many restrictions on people's conduct, but still helping them interact with each other and create some reasonable level of trust for that. And I think we should be emphatic that this is what we will also be demanding of AI agents at the very least.
Mm-hmm. I think Dan and Kathy are exactly right here. We need to be thinking about it within the context of the wider ecosystem. For instance, with biological tools, it might not be to control the foundation model and what type of specific information it could give a novice, but it's more focused on biological synthesis screening and what's occurring in labs. And so shifting the focus away from just broad, unified definitions of harm or safety that you apply to the foundation model, especially as developers themselves are increasingly releasing agents and tool integrations. We need to be thinking about what is that user going to do with it, what is that specific context, and how do we think about safety at the product level?
I guess I'll talk about a different aspect of this, which is one of the most effective things we can do in order to spark innovation, but do it safely, is to have a very, very clear set of standards that apply on, the problems that people are working on today, rather than just on the frontier lab system, right? So again, this is not regulation, but this is, a helpful set of guidelines, standards, et cetera, that, legal and compliance teams can use almost as a checklist, right? In how they should think about what it would take to deploy an AI AI-enabled system to, potentially like higher risk, use cases. I think a good parallel that we've seen in the past is model risk management, for example, which was, for more like predictive AI. Model risk management isn't really something that like scales or translates as well to generative AI, but it made it very easy for organizations that were building with AI to figure out, what they really need to do. Are they doing their due diligence? Should they be doing something other than, just red teaming or something, right? And I think in that sense, like I personally, like when I talk to these organizations, I see a lot of confusion and I see a lot of vacuum as well in terms of like any policy or standard. So I think like that would be like absolutely like transformative.
I love, Shrea, especially for you and you all to talk more about the role of open source. So what's the role of open source in, moving AI safety and reliability forward? What are the sort of pros and cons that you see of open source?
I think with open source, very candidly, my opinion has shifted over the last like 6 months or a year. I mentioned I was a researcher before this, and so very, very pro open source historically. My company is founded in open source. I think especially as open source models are really catching up to where proprietary models from OpenAI, et cetera, have been. I think a lot of the safeguards that we've kind of like taken for granted for some of these models are like not present anymore, right? So for example, how to get like somebody that's a bad faith actor to build like really much more sophisticated weapons, et cetera. Like that moat or that barrier to entry has, for example, like reduced, right, without open source models kind of having the right set of guardrails. So I think that's the con, and that's really unfortunate. And unfortunately, I also don't have a good policy around this because of how easy it is for these models to get adoption across borders, et cetera, as well, right? And to run on like really easily accessible hardware. I think a lot of the pros, I would say, come from how much easier it is to kind of like spark innovation and like test out what is the most effective set of safeguards compared to like closed source. So I'll like ground this in the example of like guardrails. So almost 2 years ago, my company as an open source project launched this idea of guardrails, which is this framing of like philosophical guardrails into actual infrastructure pieces, right? Because we were open source, it meant that that idea kind of like caught on really quickly, and that became like one of the it's one of the kind of like essential pieces of your toolkit, right, that you add to your application. And I think like easier access to, for example, like red teaming frameworks where you don't have to rely on hiring like a service, but like that knowledge proliferates. I think like that charge has been led by open source really well, and I think that will mean that collectively we'll come up with best practices, et cetera, much more easier, right, because of that barrier to entry being lower. And so I think that's where I see like a lot of the strengths being.
You go.
I was just going to say, I think there's a lot of benefit and opportunity if organizations can open source trust and safety tooling, as well as evaluation and training data sets. Not every company can have an AI research team or a trust and safety team to be able to build these tools themselves. Some of these tools can be very expensive if you're purchasing them. Being able to get data sets to train your models or to test and evaluate them can also be extremely expensive. So referring back to Singapore, the Singapore government has open sourced a number of different responsible AI tools. And so what they want to do is high tide raises all boats. By making the tools available, by making data sets available so that everybody can do trust and safety evaluations, build models responsibly, then there really is no excuse not to do it. So that's one of the real benefits of open sourcing.
I might come in here with a slightly more pro open source take. I spent a lot of time at the Department of Commerce helping write a report on the marginal risks and benefits of open weight models. So open weight, for those of you who don't know, is just releasing the weights of a model to the public instead of training data, hyperparameters, other aspects of the algorithm of the model itself. And I think, as Shrea mentioned, there are huge benefits that come from research especially safety research, and helping increase competition in downstream providers and democratize the benefits of AI to those who don't have access to their own compute or training to develop their own model. There are real risks. I'd say the two main ones come from once you release a model weight, it is impossible to get back. And so if you discover that the model that you created was actually trained on really biased data, or there are certain security vulnerabilities embedded in the model, that will propagate down in terms of any system that that model is then integrated into. It also is impossible to monitor or track because people can then download the weight onto a local model or onto a cloud service provider, and then they can either fine-tune it and, as Shrea mentioned, strip safeguards away to use for very malicious purposes, or just in ways that is completely untrackable. The problem is, especially as we've seen at scale with our red teaming practice, is safeguards on closed models are also pretty easy to jailbreak and not good enough yet. And so malicious actors who have a large motivation to use these tools for adversarial means have the ability to misuse closed models and open source models. And so it's really hard to distinguish the marginal risk instead of just the risk imposed by all AI. I think also from a geopolitical perspective, it is important that the US leads in not only AI, but also open source AI, because a lot of countries don't have access to compute to build their own models. And open models are easier to integrate into downstream systems because, as Shrea mentioned, you can fine-tune them for very specific means. And so from a national security perspective, this is important because it's embedded into critical infrastructure. But from a soft power diplomatic perspective, this is also important because it allows you to not only interact government to government, but also for model developers in the US to develop closer relationships with technology companies across the world as they integrate these systems. And so I think while there are risks, there are also extreme benefits, and I don't think that, at least right now, there's enough evidence to suggest that the marginal risks outweigh the benefits, especially when you're thinking about it on a global scale.
So I think that this always proceeds by way of a cost-benefit analysis. I think historically, let's say a year ago, there were advantages to diffusion through releasing the weights of these systems, and so I was not against them being released. Part of me would be supportive. I think that in recent months, ever since the reasoning paradigm of these AI systems, the capabilities are too high, such that they are now posing very unreasonable risks, and those will just increase as the accessibility of these systems increases, the capabilities increase, the severity of harm will also as well. So I'm making reference basically to a paper that we haven't put out because we're giving the frontier AI companies time to add safeguards for these bio things. I mentioned that XAI refuses for some bio requests. This is because when we had Harvard and MIT virology postdocs in their areas of expertise and you put it up against the reasoning model, suddenly the reasoning models are getting 89th percentile compared to them in practical wet lab skills. That looks like, here's a picture of my Petri dish. I heated it to this degrees and it doesn't work. What should I do to help me troubleshoot? What step should I do next? And can it fill in the next step in those practical wet lab things? And it can do it can do better than average for Harvard MIT virology postdocs. So that's a recent capability. You're hearing the AI companies talking about how it's so good at PhD level, difficult type of questions and things like that in STEM broadly. STEM includes virology, and virology is dual use. It has civilian and weaponization applications. And unfortunately, I think those risks are too high now. So I think that they basically are having substantial marginal risk over Google search, or more specifically speaking, publicly available information that is reasonably accessible by a person of ordinary ability. There is a competitiveness aspect to or as far as diffusion of, we have to win geopolitical swing states by releasing all our best AI capabilities open weight. I think that this empowers rogue actors. This also gives our best technologies to the PLA in China automatically. So I think I think the cost-benefit calculus has changed such to where I was supportive, but condoning or something, but not endorsing, to where I think that this practice has got to stop. Sometime sooner, it can just keep getting worse and worse. So at some point, the frog will need to jump, because the capabilities are getting high for a weaponization application. It can always get worse. You could have agents that can do bioweapon stuff compared to chatbots that can assist you in troubleshooting. So it can always get worse. And it's important that we try and get ahead of this.
Can I go in quick here?
Yeah, please.
I think that there is a reason to limit the diffusion of all advanced AI technology to certain countries. At the end of the Biden administration, we released a diffusion rule to limit the diffusion of very advanced AI capabilities that we haven't reached yet to countries on a specific list. But I don't think that, one, there's enough evidence to suggest now that that should only apply to open weight models. And I think that there is an argument that having the PLA, for instance, use and integrate US systems into their tools actually increases reliance on us and then will enable the US to have more leverage in China. I also think that diffusion worldwide is very different than diffusion to a few specific places. And so having those countries have access to US tools instead of the alternative, which DeepSeek is already a very advanced reasoning model that's open source, quite cheap to use across the world, and that will be used as the alternative. And so until you have a chance to control the diffusion of models created across the world, there's no reason to only control the diffusion of models created in the US specific to open source at the capabilities that they currently are.
So you can just fine-tune the model differently to get rid of the CCC or CCP censorship type of functionality, and you can do some bits to make it more adversarially robust. Oh, also another point to push back on is you can add reliable safeguards for bio and things like that. Making them robust to jailbreaks for criminal and tortious behavior is much more difficult, but as far as it blanket refusing to touch certain topics or touch assistance for, say, Australia Group Select and US Select agents, that you can get to have many nines of reliability that you would not have with open weight models. I think the main way to compete with China is through AI chip manufacturing or guaranteed supply chains for drones and AI chips. That seems to be a much, and that's basically what the diffusion rule is about. Is it's focusing on chips. So I think you don't want to try and do everything in every dimension necessarily. And I think a strategy, if you're concerned about them using DeepSeek, you can make American DeepSeek. You can add some safeguards, give it more U.S. values, remove the CCP censorship, and that at least neutralizes any type of advantage that they have there without getting in some sort of race of giving away your best capabilities.
So I think we're out of time, but I really want to thank all of the panelists for that lively discussion, and I'm sure we can you can pull us aside and we can have more conversations about AI safety later on. But thank you all very much.
Great.